What is going on, gunfighters? Saddle up for another episode of Gunfighter Life, the podcast where we talk about gunfighting with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world first-hand experience. First and foremost, I am a Christian, a servant of God, and a follower of Jesus Christ. God has blessed me to do many things in my life where I could do nothing apart from Him. U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, did a couple of tours in Iraq. As an assaultman after my combat tours, I was an urban warfare instructor for the Marine Corps under Mojave Viper. Also served in the U.S. Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. Also did several years in law enforcement, LAPD. I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. Been a private contractor for a 3-letter government agency. That's all I'll say about that. Been blessed to be a state rifle and pistol champion and West Coast regional rifle champion. Won more shooting competitions with the talent that God's given me than I can actually remember. Was blessed to be the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area. Our primary job, the reason we primarily existed, was to stop active shooters. I got the opportunity to head up and be the commander of that team. I grew up around guns, hunting and shooting and competing at a very early age. Been blessed to hunt all over this beautiful country, from whitetail on the East Coast to mule deer on the West Coast, and bear and elk and all manner of things. I've even been a professional big game hunter and guide. But again, most importantly, I'm a Christian. And I am your host, Michael Milito. Welcome to Gunfighter Life. Alright, gunfighters, what are we going to talk about today? We are going to talk about best loads per caliber from a professional hunter and guide's point of view. Notice I said hunter and guide. If you like this kind of format, I may do one on tactical loads, defensive loads, per caliber like this, but you can extrapolate this, right? If it's good on deer size game and a similar platform, similar barrel length, you could deduce that it would be decent for defensive use on a similar size and weight target, right? So deduce what you will from that. But I'm going to be talking about, because I've been getting questions about this a lot from patrons, and I thought, hey, one of the good things about the Patreon chat, I don't just get to help them, we get to help each other, and they get to help me, and they help me inadvertently by giving me a show idea, and hopefully a good one. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about per cartridge. And some of this I have real world first-hand experience, like I've shot a bunch of animals with this very load. Some I will go to my professional guiding experience where I've seen clients use particular things, and some I will deduce by deductive reasoning, because let's say I have no first-hand experience with a 280 Ackley improved, but I do have experience with 7mm Aud-8, and I do have experience with 7mm Rem Mag. So I can deduce what would be a good load for the 280 Ackley improved. It's just a little bit behind, in my opinion, the 7mm Rem Mag. Quite a bit more potent than the 7mm Aud-8. So that's what I'm talking about today. If you want to check out some hunting or guiding pictures or some other pictures, you can go to goodshepherdtraining.com. goodshepherdtraining.com. Anyway, with that, let's get started. The 223. Now, if you came to me and I was going to be your guide and you said, I want to go deer size, and deer size includes antelope, both mule deer and whitetail, blacktail, right? And you said, I want to go deer size, medium game hunting with 223 round. I would say, first of all, do you have anything else? And then I would ask why. And if he says something like, I want to build an AR for hunting deer, I would say, first of all, if you're going to do that and build a new one, build it in a better caliber. Did a whole episode on deer hunting with the AR. If he said, I want to build it, I would say, figure out what the cost is going to be to put together a new upper and all this stuff and the optic and all that stuff, and see if you can't just go get an affordable bolt-action rifle and a more appropriate caliber that's going to be far better. But if he insisted, if he said, for instance, I only have an AR and I really want to go hunting and I really want to take a deer with this is my one rifle, I would say, good for you. Let's pick out the best load for you. I would say start with this load. It's fairly affordable as far as the deer hunting ammo goes. Not as far as most 223 ammo goes, but you're already on the marginal side, in my opinion, for taking deer. Look at the 64 grain Winchester soft point Super X. Not an obscure load. That series has been around a long time. That technology has been around a long time. See if your gun likes that load. And if said client said something like, well, this load only shoots 1.25 inches in my gun. I have, 55 grain loads or whatever that shoot a 1/2 inch in my gun. I'd say I don't care. Go with this load or a similar one. Because I'm going to try and keep you as a guide inside 200 yards if you're hunting with the 223 on deer. And inside 200 yards, you're talking about 1.25 inch group. You're talking about under 3 inches at 200 yards. That's much smaller than a human fist on a deer. Picture that. I love accuracy and I love accurate guns, but keep it in perspective, right? Yes, I do think bullet placement is the most important. You're talking to a man who has taken multiple elk with a 243. But when the bullet gets there, it still has to do a job. So keep it in perspective. I would recommend that 64 grain. Now Federal also makes a Power Shock in 64 grain soft point. You want to try that one, see which one your gun likes better. I think Terminal Performance would be fine. And this one is going to be a 55 grain, but you have to kind of throw those numbers aside. They're going to be a little bit different when you talk about solid copper. This is one that I do trust, and that's going to be the Barnes 55 grain TSX. TSXs, if you don't know, have a really good reputation for penetrating very deep, and I think if you're talking about, and they still expand, but they also penetrate deep. They hold their integrity well. If you're talking about a marginal caliber like this, I think that this would be a really, really good choice. The Barnes TSX 55 grain, and it comes as a factory load, and I think it's a good choice. Now, to be clear, I'm not a big fan of forcing people to use lead-free ammunition, but if it's a good choice for the job, I've got no problem with it. If you think that, using lead-free ammo is going to make you start drinking soy lattes and wearing skinny jeans, then maybe look at one of the more traditional loads I already mentioned. But those 55 grain bullets and the TSXs, they're a good choice. One that I may also suggest is the 70 grain TSX, which comes in a Barnes factory load. The 70 grain TSX. Those lead-free bullets, again, on a smaller caliber like that, they really, well, in general, in any category, they have a reputation for penetrating deeply and still expanding. If you were talking like a 45-70, really doesn't make a difference. It's already big, doesn't have to expand much, and it's going to penetrate deep most of the time because of the nature of that caliber. 223, not so much. So those would be my top choices for that. Moving up to what I would consider the first proper deer caliber, and one of my favorites, the 243. Now, I'm going to mention a few hand loads on here. If you don't hand load, you might look for something similar. However, the 243 I have hunted a lot with 85 grain Sierra Game Kings loaded over Varget. Now, I'm not going to give you exact load data on here. You should work up your own load anyway. But 85 grain Sierra Game Kings on top of Varget. It's a fantastic load. It works awesome on deer. Caveat, it will expend, or at least it should if you have proper shot placement on a big deer anyway. In my experience, it expels all its energy inside that chest cavity. Now, if you're talking an affordable, effective factory load in 243, the 100 grain Federal Power Shock. It's a fantastic load. It works well, assuming your gun shoots it well. It's a very common load. It's been around a while. It is heavier for caliber than the 85 grain. And it's been around a while, which indicates to me that it works really well. And it's my factory go-to load in the 243. Now let's step up to the 6.5 Creedmoor. The 6.5 Creedmoor. I have done quite a bit of big game hunting with this. There's a whole episode called the Guide's Rifle, I think is the name of it. I did it quite a while ago when I was professionally guiding. a Kimber Adirondack and 6.5 Creedmoor quickly became like my main go-to guiding rifle, and on all manner of beasts, and exotic beasts at that. I have one load that I've seen perform so well in that gun that I really haven't looked for anything else, and that is the 125 grain Deer Season XP. If you don't know the Deer Season XP, it has a much, much larger polymer tip on it than a lot of other bullets. Like if you're familiar with I think Nosler is the one that actually owns the name Ballistic Tip, but the size of a normal ballistic tip, this thing is several times, I would say, bigger than that. In my experience, they work amazingly well on animals that have a reputation even for being tougher than the average, let's say, whitetail or mule deer in America. Things like a big fallow buck or a decent sized ram. I've taken 2 rams with this load. It's 125 grain Extreme Point XP. 125 grain, you might say for a 6.5 Creedmoor, that's a little light for caliber, and I'd say, yeah, it is. If you're going to call me up as a guide, and I don't professionally guide right now, I'm trying to do the podcast full time, and said, I want to go out and I want to shoot a deer at 1,000 yards, I would say, call somebody else. That's not the way I like to hunt. I like to spot and stalk and still hunt, drive hunt, all kinds of hunting, but that long range with a bunch of computers and super heavy rifle on a tripod, that's not really what I like to do. For what I would call reasonable ranges, this load to me has performed really, really well. And again, I've mentioned it several times on the podcast before, I get no kickbacks, I get no sponsors. You'll see me mention many different loads from many different companies, and I can give you an honest opinion because people step up on Patreon and support. Good time to mention, if you want to become a patron, there should be a link in the show notes. But we all have our biases, and I have a lot of experience with this round. There may be another round out there that works just as well, but this one for me, after I shot a couple animals with it, why mess with anything else for deer size game? Even really big, like pushing the limit of what you would consider much bigger than your average whitetail or mule deer. It's an amazing load. Again, that 6.5 Creedmoor 125 grain Deer Season XP. Be careful on the 6.5 Creedmoor. A lot of the loads in it are really accurate, but you remember that cartridge was designed as a target cartridge to shoot long-range competitions. A lot of the ammo is geared towards that. I would not recommend somebody use like an ELD or some other ammo that's really, really accurate. It was designed to hit a steel plate or a piece of paper. May it kill a deer? Sure, but there's much better choices. So be cautious on the 6.5 Creedmoor. A lot of really good, accurate loads out there that weren't engineered and designed for hunting. Look at one that was designed for hunting if you're going to hunt with it. If you're going to, ring steel with it at 1,000 yards, get one with a high BC ballistic coefficient, and it's really accurate in your gun. I think 6.5 Creedmoor can be a really good cartridge on deer size game if you get projectiles, bullets designed for terminal performance on the appropriate animal and keep it at a reasonable range. Anyway, moving on from the 6.5 Creedmoor. The 30-30. 30-30 is a great American deer slaying cartridge. It's been around so long, there are several loads that just have a reputation for working really well, and I'm going to mention those. Again, the Federal Power Shot comes up. It's affordable. I don't like to mention prices with inflation or wherever you're shopping, and know that I'm looking a lot of this up to give credit where credit is due on Midway USA. Not that I have any kickbacks or anything from them. It's just a good, easy site to navigate, and they have a lot of really good, let's say, common stuff. Find it on here, it's likely you're going to find it if you're looking for it. If you're looking for a specific load or something like that, you might try AmmoSeek. Get no kickbacks from anybody, them included. But AmmoSeek is a good website. It's kind of like Expedia or Travelocity, looking for airplane flights, but looking for ammo. So you might check that out. But that Power Shock, going back to the 30-30, the Power Shock, good old Winchester PowerPoint, not the XP we just talked about, but the old classic PowerPoint in 30-30. 150 grain, 170 grain, take your pick in those loads. And the good old Remington Core Lock. And good old Remington Core Lock, 150 grain. for deer size game, phenomenal choice. And these rounds aren't overly expensive. If you're looking for an affordable way to put meat on the table and an affordable deer hunting rifle, you might look at a lever action 30-30, whether an old used one. If I was looking new and I wanted best bang for my buck, I'd probably look at the Mossberg. That's a newer model, but it's a very classic looking design, and it's far cheaper than, let's say, if you were going to go out and buy a brand new Winchester. If you wanted an heirloom quality piece, I'd say, yeah, go with the Winchester. If you wanted the best hunting 30-30, I'd say probably look at a Marlin 336 just because of the ease and ability to mount optics and that solid receiver. However, any of them, if you want a good affordable meat harvesting way to put meat on the table, most of that 30-30 ammo is meant for kind of that style of hunting, right? That's what that 30-30 is known for today. Let's transition into the next cartridge, which is not designed for that, but you can use it for deer hunting. Just came up in a recent episode, and in fact is the cartridge that sparked this idea for this episode. The 7.62x39, the Comrade cartridge. And the 7.62x39 was not designed for deer hunting, and you might think it's a cheap, affordable way to hunt deer, but I would argue differently. Because most of that ammo is that cheap Tula or Wolf, and there's nothing wrong with that ammo. It's good for what it's for plinking, for range time, but not for deer hunting. If you're talking premium, really good quality deer loads, and again, I would put the 7.62x39 on the marginal end for hunting deer, so I'm going to want a really good premium bullet. I was really excited to see that Winchester Deer Season XP actually makes a load in the 7.62x39. That, I think, although I've never used that exact load, a very similar grain weight to a bullet in that design I am familiar with, and I would think I would start there. Also, Remington Corlock makes ammo for that, and 125 grain soft pointed bullet. Remington Corlock. So you got some good options there, and those would be the choices. Also, a Patreon recommendation would be the Federal soft point load. Now, none of these are cheap, and they're quite a bit more from what I saw than those similar loads I just mentioned in 30-30. So I would not consider this an economical choice. Now, if you said I wanted one gun like an SKS or a Galil Ace, and I wanted the ability to hunt deer, then I would say these would be a good choice for that. Or if you wanted a go-to like Howa mini action bolt action rifle or one of the CZs, you wanted a small, compact, handy hunting rifle in 7.62x39, I would say these loads would be a good choice. Again, that's the Deer Season XP, the Remington Corlock, and the Federal soft point in 7.62x39. Not some cheap ammo that says it's a hollow point that may or may not expand. Good, made for hunting rounds in the 7.62x39. Just know that they're not as common in that, and they're quite a bit more expensive from what I saw. Even in the next round we're going to go to, which would be my number one recommendation. If somebody had no other caveats, they said, I want to come hunt deer, what do you recommend? I'd say I recommend a 308. Ammo is affordable, it's got plenty of power, so a simple cup and core design bullet has and will do just fine on deer. Factory loads that are cheap and affordable and work really well. I would say start looking at the Federal, again, Power Shock. The old blue box, been around a while, got a good reputation. It's still being made. Now I've done a bit of hand loading for this cartridge. I'm really going to recommend 130 grain TSX bullets for the 308. If you look at some hand loading data for that and look at the velocities on that, for deer size game, I like the 130s. And I like the 150 grain if we're talking about those Federal soft points. I like that kind of 150 grain. It's what the 308 was designed for. A lot of people like the heavier bullets now, and I think a lot of that has to do with longer range shooting. You can do long range shooting with the 308. People have done it for a long time. I would say it's kind of antiquated for that, and that's not the kind of hunting I'm talking about anyway. We're talking about deer hunting inside, let's call it 350, even 450 yards, which is the vast majority of deer taken anywhere on the continent, especially East Coast. That 150 grain is kind of your sweet spot. Also, that 130 grain solid copper monolithic, whatever you want to refer to it as. That 130 grain TSX, just look at some load data on that if you're a hand loader and consider that. Again, it's lighter because it's made out of copper, but it's still a big bullet. It's still quite potent. And again, they have a reputation for keeping their integrity and driving deep. I don't know if they make the old TSX anymore. It's been a while since I've hand-loaded for those, living as a neo-nomad as I do now. Being very minimalist. Reloading is one of the things that I gave up. But they do make the tipped triple shock, the TTSX, which is basically the same bullet as far as I'm aware, with a polymer tip on it, giving it a little bit better aerodynamics. It's kind of the next generation of that bullet I used to load for. So look up some load data on that. I think you'll be impressed. I also, on the opposite end of that spectrum, if I was going to go brush hunting or bear hunting or something like that, where I'd have my gun zeroed, let's say, for those 130 grain barns, if I was taking reasonable shots out west. But if I get into some thick, dense stuff and I have a bear tag, I'm talking thick manzanita, if you don't know what that is, just real thick, dense cover, and I'm in bear country, I might switch to one of these 200 grain bullets in a 308. My point of aim, point of impact difference at 50 yards is academic. With those, I would load the 200 grain spear soft points. And for both these, I forget whether I used Varget. It was probably Varget, or whether it was Benchmark. But either one of those powders is really good. I want to say it was Varget. It may have been something else. But really good projectile choices for the 308. And actually, in doing some more research, I did find that they do still make the 130 grain original TSX. So you can get the original or the tipped version. I also noticed that they do load it in a factory load. So if you want that 130 grain TTSX in a factory load from Barnes, I did see that. I know these podcasts to you may seem like they're only, 20, 30, 40 minutes long. In real life, they take quite a bit longer than that. Now, we can't leave out the 270, I don't think. I guess we could, but I'm not going to. The 130 grain is kind of the standard for the 270 Winchester, known for being a great deer caliber, among other things. Also a great elk caliber, and my choices might be different for elk, but I'm sticking with deer size game today. It's already going to be a long podcast. If you like this, again, give me some feedback at goodshepherdtraining.com and let me know what kind of game animal you might like to hear about. But for this, hitherto I've kind of mentioned these Winchester soft points and the Federal soft points and the Corlocks, all kind of in the same general thing. But the 270, you're going quite a bit faster than a lot of these other cartridges we talked about. And that can sometimes cause jacket and core separation. So I'd really look at the Corlock. And recently they came out with the tipped Corlock ammunition by Remington. They make 130 grain tipped Corlock. It's not cheap, but it's not crazy expensive either. And it's breaking that 3,000 feet a second, so I'd call that getting into pretty high velocities for traditional rifle cartridges. Also, this bullet has a really good reputation. The Federal Premium Line Terminal Ascent, 136 grain. Polymer tip bonded. I would really look at that load. If I were going to hunt with the 270, I would probably start with that load. Now let's talk about the 30-06. I don't know whether the 30-06 or the 308 is more popular as a whole for deer hunting. We can certainly probably concede it's one of the most popular. And should be no surprise here, the Remington Corlock 150 grain. Gonna be kind of my start there, see how it does, see how your gun likes it. Now, if you've done some hunting before, and I'm fairly confident I can rely on you to know when to shoot and when not to shoot, I may also recommend the 180 grain Remington Corlocks for deer size game. And when you get into this, although the 30-06 and the 308 are fairly common in lighter bullet weights, there's really an advantage when you go to heavier bullet weights in the 06. And I would feel comfortable with you taking a much more quartering shot, like a heavy quartering 2 or even a straight on shot, if I knew that you were a decent shot with this size rounding up. The 30-06 with that 180 grain Corlock, probably on the lower end and most economical that I would recommend, like a full-on deer is facing me shot. That 180 grain Corlock has kind of a deep penetrating aspect to it that I would like to have on those kind of shots. I would take shots with that load that I would not take with one of my favorite loads, like the 243 85 grain Sierra Game Can. I consider that a broadside shot load. Maybe some very picky shot placement loads. The .30-06 and 180 grain, I would really consider, like, the animal's coming right at me, I know where to put that bullet, but I have no problem with that. A very steep quartering away shot, assuming I have time and I can know where that rib cage is, I'd have no problem with that shot, with that bullet either. I know that it's, well, I shouldn't say I don't know. There's always this weird thing in ballistics. It could do some weird thing, but I'm going to trust that that bullet is going to hit at that angle and penetrate deep enough to do what I want it to do. Winchester Ballistic Silver Tip has been around a long time. It also makes a 180 grain bullet, and it says Rapid Controlled Expansion Polymer Tip. Now, until I had tested this on a few deer broadside, I don't know that I would trust this load for those angling away shots, but I thought it was worth a mention. And if you wanted a little bit more premium load, the Federal Premium, I didn't do that on purpose, the Federal Premium 30-06 150 grain nozzler ballistic tip. Nozzler ballistic tips have a good and I think well-deserved reputation. And if you were talking about hunting bigger game, you might look at it like a nozzler partition. It would be a good choice for deer too, but I want to kind of stick in the deer size game category. And I think that's where I'm going to wrap up today for deer hunting. And realize how I'm coming at this. I'm coming at this as if you were one of my clients calling me and saying, hey, let's say we're hunting the Palouse Hills in Idaho, and you have the choice to either take mule deer or whitetail deer, which is a thing there. And you're bringing one of these cartridges, and you ask me for a load recommendation. This is what I'm going to recommend. If you are an avid hunter and you have a great load that you've hand-loaded or cherry-picked or have a lot of experience with, that doesn't make it a bad load. In fact, if you called me and said, here's what I have and here's what I'm comfortable with and I've taken so many deer with, I'd say rock on, bring what you're comfortable with. But if you just got a rifle and you've never shot a deer and you're asking me for loads, this is what I'm going to recommend. Also, I stuck with common deer hunting calibers. I really like the 7mm Aud 8. Didn't talk about it. It's not super common. Didn't talk about the 7x57. Again, same thing. Or the 280. I think perhaps the 280 is one of the most well-balanced North American big game hunting cartridges. But it's not common, so I didn't talk about it. I will briefly mention the 300 because it is popular. And I want to say, it may have been another caliber, but I want to say the last two animals that had really bad experiences I remember on big game hunts, the animal wasn't recovered. I want to say they were both 300 Win Mags, and I may be misremembering that. And you may think that that's like, it doesn't make any sense because it's a similar caliber. 30 caliber is good, the 308, the 30-06, the 300 is just more power, more velocity. And I would say there's more to it than that. If you're hunting with these traditional cup and core simple bullets, if you drive them really fast, you can get a lot of rapid expansion because you're driving them really fast. A lot of those cheaper bullets in those calibers weren't designed for that. So they may, although they have more power on paper, disintegrate's not the right word, but they may come apart and lose their integrity far faster, giving you inadequate penetration, even though it's a more powerful round. Also, a lot of people, I don't know if what the cause here or the effect is, what's the chicken or what's the egg. They're not a good hunter. They think they're going to make up for it with a more powerful round. Maybe they think, I've got a 300 Win Mag, it doesn't matter where I shoot the animal. I remember being on a big ram hunt. Guy shoots this ram with a 300 Win Mag. Animal standing there. This animal takes off running and looks back, and I can tell by his body language it's shot bad, like in the guts, but it's not gonna stop anytime soon from that wound that I could surmise. Likewise, I want to say, because this wasn't my hunt, we were hunting in a group but paired off with guides. I was one of the guides. Somebody else I think shot a decent sized big Axis. Axis deer is kind of a bigger bodied deer from Asia. If you're not familiar, they're beautiful animals, make some kind of obnoxious noises. But anyway, on this hunt, and this guy shoots it, and we didn't find it for quite a while later, all out, like going all over the place looking for this deer. And I want to say that also was a Magnum. If you are going to hunt deer with a 300 Magnum, say for this, really look to those bonded bullets. It's going to be more expensive anyway because the ammo just in general is going to be more expensive. But don't just get the cheap ammo. Ironically, if you're getting that more expensive caliber, I think you really need to be judicious on making sure that bullet stays together. And that's going to require some engineering. I'm not saying 300 Magnums, 300 Win Mag, or the 300 Winchester Short Mag, or any iteration thereof doesn't have application in big game hunting. They certainly do. But I'd say it's kind of superfluous more than is necessary for a deer size game. Introduce a lot of problems into that. going back to the chicken and the egg thing, maybe it's the recoil that the shooters are not really comfortable shooting that gun, and that makes them a worse shot than they would be with another caliber. And that's hard to quantify scientifically, and I'm just surmising that. I'm just from what I've seen in the field. Anyway, those are my thoughts. Again, if I didn't mention your favorite load or whatever, you want to hear one like this on elk or something like that, or you want me to do one like this on tactical application for 9mm, 357, 45 ACP, 12 gauge, let me know. I could do that too. Again, you can contact me at goodshepherdtraining.com. And I don't often mention it, or at least I haven't in the past. I'm going to try and do better about it. There is a gear shop. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. You can go there, check out some gear if you're interested. I know not everybody wants to become a patron and just support the podcast. They want something tangible out of it, and that's fine. Check out the gear shop. Again, goodshepherdtraining.com. All right, with that, tactical tip of the day. MRE toilet paper. If you're not familiar, look up what it looks like. It's very small and compact. They fit quite a lot of toilet paper in those MREs. But if you know somebody that has an MRE, ask them to save you the toilet paper or buy it separate. And I suppose you could do this, the other kind of tissue paper or something as well. For its intended purpose, when you're out in the field, that makes sense to have some toilet paper that's really compact in one of your hunting jacket pockets. It's also multifunctional if you want a clean, dry thing. Not going to scratch up your lenses on your binoculars or on your optic or something like that. You also have that. Or if you're following a blood trail, you see some blood, or you want to see if something is blood, you lay a piece of this, a half a piece, probably a full piece on the start of your trail, some smaller pieces going along. When you see some blood, you put one of these white pieces of toilet paper down. If you're not sure if it's blood, like in the fall and there's a lot of red spots, you can touch it, and if it soaks it up, you can easily tell if it's blood or not. And then you'll have a much more clear trail, especially if it's starting to get dark. Right? You can see that white paper a lot easier than you're going to see that blood in the dark. And they do make that super expensive, like CSI stuff that you can spray. But are you really carrying a whole bottle of that with you in the field? It's got one purpose. The toilet paper is cheap, it's easy, it's got many purposes. Also, if you get lost, you can use it to mark your trail too. You can hang it up in tree branches or whatever. The best for that? No, but you've got something. And there's a lot of toilet paper in that little compact package. Anyway, that's your tactical tip of the day. How about tactical verse of the day? Because hunting is great for putting meat on the table, but man does not live by bread alone. Man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceedeth out of the mouth of God. It's a good verse, but not the verse of the day that I'm going to pick. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. You'll find that in the book of 1 Corinthians. That applies to so much more than just hunting, but it also applies to hunting. I remember when I was a young man and I would study these ballistics books and ballistics tables, and I saved up working on my own to buy my first deer rifle. And I lived in the eastern shore, the Delmarva Peninsula, the East Coast. But I looked at all these ballistic charts and I decided the rifle that I should have is the 7mm Remington Magnum. Because it looked the best on paper. And none of the old timers, none of the guys I knew that actually took deer consistently hunted with that cartridge. Because it looked good on paper. That's how I thought as a child. I look at hunting differently now that I'm a man. And hopefully you look at things soberly and as a man. Not just hunting, but many other things as well. With that, thanks for listening and have a blessed day.